Well, ladies and gentlemen, the president's address with Trump has just concluded. And at the time of recording, I just finished watching the whole thing. And what a bloodbath. I mean, if you watched it live, you saw Cyril cringe, like he proper cacked his pants. But before we get on to the main video, if I can yet again remind you, ladies and gentlemen, just click the bell icon, subscribe to the channels, help a brother out. These videos are hard to make. It's a lot of time. It's a lot of effort. So really, subscribe to the channel, help a brother out. Anyway, let's get straight on to the video. But before I do, can I draw your attention to the YouTube short I did yesterday around the budget? I basically tried to do the entire budget in 2 or 3 minutes to give you everything that went on in the budget. Go watch that video. I mean, that was the most uninteresting video, knowing that Trump and Ramaphosa were due to speak to each other. So the day started out rather interestingly because obviously in South African media, we were all talking about what the potential meeting could look like. What we had is we had some news that Johan Rupert was going, Retief was going, Ernie Els was going, John Steenhuisen was going, and the head of the trade union, COSATU. And very unsurprisingly, well, Adrian Gore, the CEO of Discovery, was going as part of the whole business consortium. So Ramaphosa assembled a cracker stanner team of white guys. And obviously the idea behind the white guys going would be for Ramaphosa to say, you see, I'm not racist. There's no genocide in South Africa. I've got white friends. And because I've got white friends, there'd never be any form of genocide there. In any case, you would have noticed if you watched my videos yesterday that Starlink was going to be granted a license or an exemption to operate in South Africa. And this had all been done in an attempt to assuade Elon Musk to support Cyril Ramaphosa and not basically climb down their throats, specifically in relation to the BEE rules. Now, this became very interesting because the day started with the EFF suggesting that if this exemption was granted to Elon Musk, that they would take the South African government and specifically Ramaphosa to court for attempting to bribe a foreign diplomat with a license to Starlink. And I made a video on that. I mean, the whole thing was cringe. In any case, Cyril Ramaphosa announced that he would go there and he wouldn't be humiliated. The national press in South Africa jumped on board and started to support him and talk how majestic he'd be and how he'd fight down Trump and really show him what's what. It was very interesting that Marco Rubio then went on stage and discussed why they had South Africa in the United States and they were giving them a dressing down. And specifically, he said that South Africa constantly showed itself to be unaligned with the US. They were constantly against US interests. He said if this had happened once or twice, you'd go okay. But he said at every single turn, they're against US interests, whether it be China, whether it be Russia, whether it be Iran, whether it be with Israel, you name it, they were constantly against US interests. In fact, at points, they'd been openly hostile to US interests abroad in their own party conferences where they actually talked about, killing the US, death to the US, as if they were all somehow fanatical terrorists. Now, news then broke that apparently the US would be open to do some deals with South Africa. They would be wanting to do investment with them. And specifically, the reason for wanting to do investment with them was so that they didn't actually have to constantly support South Africa with aid. Because the US now, underneath Donald Trump, is like investment first, aid later. Like aid, we don't want to send you money for nothing. You should work for it, do something for it, and that'll be swell. And in typical fashion, Gwede Mantashe, who I must remind you is currently the president of South Africa, he's the acting president because Paul Mashatile is out the country, as is Cyril Ramaphosa. And so Gwede is the president. And he came out and he said, well, you see, South Africa can't just give our minerals to Trump, in the same way that they did with Zelensky. Because if you recall, there was a deal that Zelensky was going to give mineral rights to America in exchange for the support in the war against Russia. And so obviously, Mantashe, being Mantashe, came out and said, well, we're not doing the same. So that's just not going to happen. Now, news also came out that a lot of individuals specifically were worried about how the whole thing would go with Cyril Ramaphosa because he doesn't have the training that Zelensky's had in dealing with international leaders like Trump. And so from that perspective, when Trump turned up the rhetoric, they were worried that, well, Cyril would crack and he wouldn't actually be able to deal with the pressure in the way that others had. And to a large degree, that's exactly what you, ladies and gentlemen, were hoping would be the case. Like everybody was sat there and waiting. Like we knew that this was going to be a cracker. And ladies and gentlemen, it was disastrous to say the least. And to be honest, at points, I felt sorry for Cyril. Cyril did not have a good time. And so they did the usual thing. They exchanged pleasantries. They were polite. They sat down in the Oval Office. They introduced each other and who they were. And very unsurprisingly, the media obviously tried to read body language. They were talking about how Cyril had basically shaken his hand, and it was this firm handshake, and it was dominance. You know, the media is just so cringe. And then it came down to it. They said, well, why are we here? And one journo asked that, and I got to admit, like, if I got interrupted by journos in the same way that Trump did, I'd hang a lot of them. Like, it was really disconcerting. Watching the whole exchange, I just wanted to scream at them and say, like, guys, shut up. I don't want to listen to you. So how Trump does it, hats off to the guy. Like, I would not put up with it. I'd hang all these people. Anyway, apparently this journo asked Trump, so why are we here? Like, why is there this issue with South Africa? And so Trump said, well, terribly bad things are happening. And in the typical fashion, the journos were like what? And so Trump was like, I tell you what, we're not even going to discuss this. I'm going to show you the videos. You knew it. You knew it was coming. And so he's like, I'm going to show you the videos. Put them up on the projector. We're going to watch the videos.
But we're starting with this whiteness. We are cutting the throat of whiteness. In Ghana. Shoot to kill. Gamanza. Kill the poor. The farmer. Kill the poor. The farmer. Pa. 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 Shoot to kill. Gamanza.
And who was it? Julius Malema. You knew it was coming. And he just played clip upon clip upon clip upon clip of Julius Malema say, kill the Boer, steal their land, we don't need the white people, slit the throats of the white people. Every clip you knew was going to happen. It just came out. And you could see on Cyril's face, he was like, what the living, like, I hate Jews. But he knew it. He knew it was coming. There was this slight smirk on his face. He knew it. He knew Julius was going to be the guy. And then they showed him that famous cross video. If you've seen it on YouTube or on Twitter, you know the one. It's like the cars are driving, there's all these white crosses, and they go for miles. There's news articles from the Daily Mail. There's news articles from this and that. And he says, ultimately, he's had untold numbers of people applying to leave the country. He says Australia is being inundated with applications. And so is the US. I mean, specifically, once they opened the refugee program, that was it. It was like the numbers flood through. And yeah, that's kind of true. Australia also gets inundated. I mean, I know people that are currently in the process of wanting to go to Australia. I don't know why. Australia's a shithole of note. Just my opinion. Don't shoot me. But they all they want to go to Australia. And I know of these things. So what Trump's saying is, well, it's true. And so Cyril says exactly what I knew he was going to say. If you've been watching my videos, you knew I predicted this. And what he said is, I'm not going to answer this. I'm going to let my token white guy, John Steenhuisen, he's my agricultural minister. See, he's a white guy, like white guy. I'm going to stress that he's a white guy. Can you stand up and address this for me? And so John stands up and says, well, actually, the guys that you're looking at are these like minority party leaders. They're not big deals. And we formed this GNU to keep them out of power. And so Ramaphosa is asked by Trump, he says, do you not denounce this language? Do you think it's okay? And Ramaphosa goes, of course I denounce it. This is terrible. And he's like, if you know Ramaphosa, ladies and gentlemen, like we all do, he's never talked against this. He's never said, don't sing Kill the Boer song. He's never said, Julius, calm it. We've all asked the question, why is Ramaphosa silent on this? And here he is on the world stage going, oh, of course, this is terrible. He says, we drew up this thing in 1940, whatever, who cares? This Freedom Charter, and it says that the land belongs to everybody. And we never condone this. And so Trump says, well, why haven't you arrested him? If I had somebody stand up in my parliament claiming or wanting to kill some people, we'd arrest them. So why haven't you arrested him? To which he goes, I'm Gus. John then says, well, obviously the EFF's only a small little party. And Trump says, I've seen the video. There was a stadium. You remember the stadium, right? Julius on his little forklift. Yeah, this. He says, I've seen that stadium, over 100,000 people in there, all singing, kill the Boer, chanting to kill the Boer. That's not a small political party. That's a sizable force. You need to save your country. He says he doesn't want to see people wanting to leave the country. This needs resolving. And Cyril's like, yes, these guys. And so then Trump says, okay, well, let's hear from Ernie. What's Ernie got to say? He says, I love Ernie. I used to play golf with him. Well, so Ernie gets up and he says he's a proud South African. He wants things to improve in the country. He says, look, it's been 35 years since the transition from apartheid to democracy. And he says, you know what? Cyril helped with the transition, but there's been 35 years. He says, yes, there was a lot of anger from apartheid, but two wrongs don't make a right. We need a way forward. And he says, you know what? The US can help us with this. He says, the US can help us improve things. What else are we going to do? We can't carry on like this. Then he goes over and he says, well, Johan Rupert, what do you got to say? And he says, well, he says he's been the biggest target of the EFF. He says, go Google my name and you'll see I'm the guy they pick on all the time. And it's true. He says they even picketed my house. And that's true, they did. And so he says, Rupert says, see this guy in front of me. So Lamola sat in front of him on the chair. He says, this guy was actually in the youth league with Malema. And he's changed. He's a reformed guy. He's a good guy now. So he says, it's possible. He says, but actually himself and Ernie, they're building properties in South Africa. He says they're very positive about the future of South Africa. He says Ernie's building a cottage. He's building 3 homes for his grandchildren. Like he wants people to stay there. He says, but a lot of the murders are committed by foreigners and a lot of them are due to unemployment. And by foreigners, he means undocumented foreigners. So Rupert just sends some money to like Gates and McKenzie because that's his ticket, right? The undocumented foreigner, that's your guy. He then says that the big companies leaving South Africa are an actual issue and they need to be addressed because we need to grow the economy and not have a culture of dependency, because it's this culture of dependency that's causing problems in South Africa. These big companies leave and then they have to rely on the state. And the only way to stop that is by having growth of the economy to support jobs. He says by supporting jobs, that's the only way to stop inequality. Now, the reason this is also important is because it was leaked out today that one of the things that Trump is going to ask is for basically the termination of BEE, the abandonment of all the race-based laws, or at least the watering down of them so that they don't affect economic growth. Because according to the leak, the idea was that BEE is collapsing the economy, and that's based on all the data that we've seen. And so if the entire thing is to improve economic growth, you need to scrap BEE. That's at least one of the things they're going to talk about. And I'm sure that excites you and many other individuals because BEE is basically an unwarranted tax now on the economy, and it's a tax that the economy can't support. Finally, Retief was allowed to get up and basically talk about it. And he was like, dude, you got a farm. What's your experience? And he's like, well, I live in Polokwane. He says, we do have a problem with farm murders. A lot of the guys there are being killed and some of their farms are constantly being under threat of being burnt down and they're constantly trying to chase them away. He says, they love farming. They don't want to leave. He says, but it's very difficult when their equipment gets stolen. He says, they all live behind electric fences. There is a fear of violence. He says, And a lot of his family have actually been attacked in their house. He says, but he loves South Africa. He loves the country and they all want to stay there. And like, dude, you're a legend. Like, this is exactly how I feel. I also don't want to leave South Africa. I also want to stay, apply pressure on the government in order to effect change. But this is a country worth fighting for. I completely agree with the guy. Next, they got out the commie, the head of the COSATU. And I must admit, I cringed. I was like, why? Like, these guys are not commie lovers. Why are you doing this? And actually, her speech wasn't terrible. She said that there were 600 companies in South Africa, all of which had US links, and that if those companies go and a go is lost and there's sanctions, she said that's 500,000 jobs that will be wiped out immediately. She says, what South Africa needs is more foreign direct investment. And I agree. So I've got to ask you, Mrs. COSATU, dude, I liked everything you said up until now, but why force all the BE bull rubbish and all the government backhanders and all this junk that you know mean that direct foreign investment is problematic? Then she says, well, we've got a 40% unemployment rate. A lot of people have no hopes of jobs. We've got this border problem with lots of undocumented people. And she says, all of these things need addressing, because if we don't have jobs and we can't improve the quality of life of individuals, this will just get worse. And then the proper problems that we here to discuss, the violent nature of South Africa, she says, is just going to get worse. She also said that there is currently no expropriation without compensation. She said they're using the principle of willing buyer, willing seller, which is true. And she says that blacks are basically being murdered worse than white individuals. And so from her perspective, it's not about race, it's about crime. And the only way to stop crime is through investment and with forms of technology, which the US could help with, which would stop crime. Now, she's very correct. There is no expropriation without compensation. However, there is this thing that they don't talk about a lot, and that is there is land grabs. These land grabs do mean that quite often the land is taken from them, yes, illegally, but the state doesn't do anything to remove the illegals, which means that you give it a degree of state sanctioning through the principle of agency, because these individuals aren't stopped from doing it. And so, yes, there is no expropriation, but there is land grabs, which to a degree are state sanctioned. So let's just be a little bit clear on that. And I'm sure Trump knows this, like he knows, and he made well clear that he knows. So they then asked Trump, what happens about the genocide? Have you made your mind up on genocide? And that, ladies and gentlemen, should be very important to you, because if there is no genocide, the executive order falls away and you can't get refugee status there. So watch that space. But apparently, he said, well, he hasn't made up his mind, and that's why he's there to talk with Cyril, because he wants to save lives. He says that's all he's interested in. He's not there because of his health. He says it's not exactly a nice conversation. He says that's why he's working with Rwanda and Russia. They just want to save lives, and he thinks that's a good thing. And the final thing they asked him is, what about G20? Are you going to G20? You said you weren't. And he said, well, the US is needed. Otherwise, it's the G19, and that would be pointless. And he says, Cyril said, yes, well, we'd love to see Trump there in November. Maybe he'll come. And Trump said, well, we'll see. And with that, they all went off to do the whole behind the closed doors discussions. And that's going to go on for a few days. And that was it. Like that clip where Julius was mentioned and they started playing comedy gold. Like everybody knew it was going to happen, and it happened. And Cyril looked so uncomfortable. The guy looked like he wanted to hang him. So you could see his face. He was like, Julius, what have you done to me? It was just priceless. Anyway, that was the big day. It came and went. It was like Christmas. And I got to say, I actually feel really hopeful about the meeting. Like I really feel hopeful. I don't know what will happen. It's going to take some time for the results of this to filter through. But I feel hopeful because the pressure has now been applied and everybody has said on the international stage, dude, you need to fix this. Like you've got problems. And he's had to admit it. He's had to admit it that they've got problems. And Julius, my man, yes, you're screwed. That's all I'm saying, dude. You're stuffed. Anyway, these are just my views. Let me know what you think in the comments. Until tomorrow. Bye.